roam around campus today looking at various wildflowers. And we're down on the path going to the cliff, not the cliff house, to the council ring. And here is a yellow lady slipper in an area where there used to be a lot of them, and now there aren't as many. We don't know what's going on. But they are beautiful with those fused petals to form that little slipper or moccasin-like flower. And these, they're fading already, these kind of, they were maroon at first, colored sepals behind the petals. And the classic lily family, or orchid family veination on the leaves. But it's hard for it to not be your favorite wildflower when it's in bloom, that's for sure. Yellow lady's slipper. We're behind the west thorn, and there's a thicket of thimbleberry in bloom here. Not really a wildflower, it's actually a shrub related to raspberry and blackberry. It has these large white flowers, even bigger than an apple blossom, same family. And they will produce a soft but very sweet tart berry later in the summer that are very good to eat. Lots of creatures eat them. And the leaves are very different from other plants in this genus, the genus rubus. This has these large maple-like leaves. I think some people, when they see a young one not in flower, they think it's a maple seedling, but it is not even related. So this is thimbleberry, called that because the fruit is so large you can put your finger in it sometimes, like a thimble. Not everything that's pretty is something you want at the clearing. This is Dame's rocket. Looks a lot like woodland phlox, but it's in the mustard family, so it has 4 petals, not 5 like phlox. And you can see here the variation from this pinkish purple or lavender color all the way to white. So the color varies in the flowers from plant to plant sometimes. But it is an invasive species. And at the clearing, we've been picking this every year for years, and we still get some coming up. Our volunteer crew on Thursday one of their tasks will be to walk the campus area and pull the Dame's rocket. And a lot of people will say, of course, well, it's so pretty, why are you picking it? I always tell people you have to get past pretty when it comes to invasive plants. And what's pretty in somebody's garden, backyard garden, might not be pretty, is not pretty at a place like this, where every place one of these grows, one of our native wildflowers, like a lady slipper, could be growing. So we eliminate Dame's rocket at the clearing, and we'll do so on Thursday. Here's another pretty one that also smells nice, lily of the valley, but it's also a non-native and invasive. We have several. This is just a small patch in front of cabin 7 on the south end of the east dorm, but we have several patches at the clearing in wild areas where it's expanding. And this, you can pull Dame's rocket, it pulls easily. This does not. This you have to either keep pulling again and again and again to exhaust it, or you have to treat it somehow with an herbicide. And I know everybody grew up with lily of the valley. I did. Smells great. Again, what's appropriate in your garden at home may not be appropriate at the clearing. So this is one that we haven't tackled much yet, but it's on the list to start controlling the lily of the valley. We're just around the corner on the east dorm, on the east side now, east of room 7, and we have a patch of Solomon's plume. People also call it false Solomon seal. And I've trained that's how I learned it, false Solomon seal, but I've trained myself to say Solomon's plume. There's nothing false about it. It's a wonderful wildflower with these long, sometimes up to 3 feet long, arching stems, and this large cluster of small white flowers at the end in the lily family with that marked parallel veination. And these will turn into, each of these flowers will turn into a little red berry later in the summer. And as the berries ripen, they get heavier, and sometimes it'll just arch all the way to the ground at the right height for chipmunks and squirrels to eat the berries. I think songbirds eat them too, some songbirds. Anyway, it's a really beautiful native wildflower with this wonderful form, big flower cluster, and attractive red fruit later in the season. Solomon's plume. Again, on the east side of the East Dorm, on the other side of the walk, is columbine with these dangling, interesting shaped flowers that hummingbirds like, by the way. And they can vary in color from this kind of tang orange up to more of an orangey red. And get quite tall. They do tend to seed themselves pretty freely. I have it in my garden, and in a few places I have to move them around or just pull them as a weed because they can be so many sometimes. But it's a gorgeous, gorgeous flower. Interesting shape. And again, the hummingbirds and other pollinators love them. Columbine. Here's a pagoda dogwood in full bloom right in front of the kitchen with these large clusters of small white flowers. They'll turn into bluish berries later in the season that are devoured by birds right away. This grew up as a seedling here a couple of years ago, and I kept thinking I would move it, and I kept procrastinating, and eventually it grew up into a nice tree. So pagoda dogwood right in front of the kitchen. And here among a patch of Solomon's plume is a lone white baneberry, a really tall one. They're seldom this tall, with its kind of long inflorescence of, again, small white flowers. And these will turn into little white berries later in the season that are quite showy and noticeable, but they're also deadly poisonous. So this is one of those plants you got to be really careful about in a garden, especially if there are children around. Nice foliage, and it's actually a nice garden perennial. I have some at home, but it is one you have to be aware of. White baneberry, called baneberry because it's poisonous. Also called doll's eyes. Sorry, Eric. This little guy here, only 4 or 5 inches tall, is Canada mayflower, another plant in the lily family, usually only 2 leaves, in a little cluster of, again, white flowers, and in this case, like Solomon's plume, turn into little red, smaller than Solomon's plume, little red berries later in the season that are eaten by creatures. It's a pretty little thing, often grows in patches. We have quite a few here, but only a few are flowering, but it's all over in here. And again, usually only 3, 4, 5 inches tall, 5 inches at the most. Canada mayflower, sometimes called wild lily of the valley.